month or so ago, like always, got trapped in some YouTube loop. Found this particular channel from Earden, I guess. I don't know. You know how YouTube is. It just sends you something real interesting like. So we go over here and of course we find this crazy video about Satan worship causing the mud flood. Don't know what a mud flood is, but might be like a big flood if you know what I mean. But then there's this Tartaria. I don't know what Tartaria is. So you watch the video. And what do you find out? Well, you find out that there's something called star forts. I didn't know anything about them. Do you? Now you do, and I'm sorry. But anyways, that takes you to this guy's page, John Levy. He's got a really fun page. You can really get lost in some very mysterious things. And of course, that's what I did. Found this really cool video. Mountains or trees in the beginning. Kind of caught me. I don't know. Watch it. It's interesting. And then, of course, you know, there's the actual mud flood. You know, it's an interesting possibility, right? So check it out. But then, you know, of course, you know, we got more star forts. But then the star forts takes you to another place, which I'd never been. And that's, of course, the Library of Congress, right? If you haven't been in the Library of Congress, I suggest that you do. It has so many free little goodies in it that I had no idea. Something like maps, old maps, like these ones, right? And this is kind of where these guys are going on about. There is this place on these maps called Tartaria. See it? It's right there. I don't know. You tell me. It's a great mystery. Anyways, what ended up happening is I basically just said, it's time to let go. Let go.
Let go!
You know. And so anyways, we go and we find some interesting things from Mr. John Levy. Let's check that out real quick.
Here's what happened in real time with our research. Most people had never heard of the World's Fairs, and you might see the photo before you hear the narrative, in this case, 100+ years later. What is this grand city with waterways and magnificent structures? And then you might watch the rest of the video or read the rest of the story that we're given. And how could you swallow it? How stupid would you have to be to think that someone would build something like this and tear it down, barely using it for a year and tearing it down? And I think that's the case with everything. We are treated like children when fed a history. And again, why talk when you know? I guess just to share. I guess it's worth sharing, almost like philanthropy, in this case, with knowledge.
Well, I mean, that's the question, right? Have you heard about the fair before? I mean, I had heard about it, but you know what I always think about when I think of the fair? Corn dogs and waffle cones. So let's just look at one more clip here.
Confused with expositions. Very similar, at least from our perspective, showcasing amazing machinery and architecture and engineering of giant parcels of land in a very early time period. And in this particular example, in St. Louis, we initially have a St. Louis exposition followed by a St. Louis World's Fair. An easy transition, and just the number of repurposings that these grounds and buildings undergo is enough reason to raise the eyebrow of even the most unaware. Here we can see, for example, the glorious fairgrounds and site in 1874. In the middle of the Civil War, the fairgrounds were repurposed, and one of the buildings was turned into a massive hospital. Really amazing that they could build all these wonders in such a short amount of time for some of the stupidest reasons, and yet have to repurpose a fair building into a hospital? With the short time frame it took them to build everything in the past, and there seeming to be no shortage of funding or skilled labor, there should be no good excuse given to the repurposing of a building by these people and their narrative.
All right. I know it's a lot to take in. But you know, there's just a eensy weensy little problem here. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to walk you through just a Google map here real quick. Okay. So here we go. We're looking up Forest or Fairground Park, right? This is where the St. Louis Exposition was held at. And you know, here it is. Here's Fairground Parks. Pretty cool. You know, it'd be really neat if we could just use this park and expand it to, I don't know, run the 1904 World's Fair. That'd be very useful. Just to kind of show you, you know, here it is. Here's downtown St. Louis. Here's the good old Gateway Arch there. Haven't been up in that fun elevator. You probably should give it a try. But you know, there's just one small problem. There's Fairground Park, and actually over here is where the fair was held. I don't know. And you can even see here is the art museum that's still here today. Here's the Grand Basin. We'll probably be seeing a little bit of that later. But you know what else is over here? Oops, come on now. Is Washington University. And we just take a look at Washington University, you kind of see a suspicious little building there. And if we really look over here, you're really going to see it. This one. Ah, yes, Brookings Hall. So Brookings Hall is in Washington University. And no, it's not a hospital. I'm sorry, but it's not. It never was. Now, the building was built before the fair, but guess who leased it out? The fair did. I should say the Louisiana Purchase Exposition Company. They're the ones who leased it out. So, you know, we just sort of got to ask ourselves some questions, right? Maybe we should take another look at something else here. Okay. Let's start this. All right, let's get right into the good stuff. How does all this begin? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to clear some land, okay? So here we go. We found a map. This is from around the 1860s. And you can see Forest Park does not even exist yet, right? It's literally still just open tracts of land. As we go from 1869 down to 1896, you can see St. Louis has become a very impressive city. I found a lot of really interesting things during this research, some great books and things like this, but you can see St. Louis is a big city in 1896. It's not some simple horse and buggy town like some people might believe, but here's Forest Park. Now, what does this company do? The company's given around $15 million. They formed this huge company, okay? And they leased property. Now, people might ask, well, why'd they tear all this stuff down? This is why. They didn't own the land. They leased the land. Like, you know, a lot of fairs do. They lease the land. It's not theirs. So, let's, you know, in the very beginning, this is what it looks like. This road is called Lindell Boulevard. And this is where the pike is. And this is they called it the wilderness. But basically, this is where the fair is. And they got to clear all this out, okay? And in the very, very beginning, you can see there are some little people down here. And here's another one here. These are surveyors, okay? There were 11 crews running simultaneously, just doing surveys alone, okay? And this was in December of 1901 that they were doing this at. Now, they break ground. Well, I should say, Mr. Francis breaks ground, the president of the company here. You can see I'm taking a nice little shovel full. And by December, we've started to do work, okay? We start doing the grading work. And as we'll find out, it's a combination of things, right? We're using horses, but so far I've found nearly, I don't know, 60 or 70 different contractors with multiple contracts running simultaneously doing all of this work. But yeah, they use horses to pull out tree stumps and to plow up ground. And here's just an example of something like what they would have used. I don't know the exact model, but this is something that was very popular in the time frame. Here's another example with that similar type of plow, but you also got guys just out there with pickaxes just getting some work done, you know. Here they are pulling an actual grading sled, and you can see there's a large amount of ground that they've already cleared. Now, I will say that not all of these photos are going to be chronologically in order. Some of them are placed and grouped by what we're doing, like grading. So just keep that in mind. Here we go. Here's our first real piece of technology. Okay. I know there's some misconceptions about what kind of technology they had. They had steam shovels. This is what they are pulling trees out and saving them for later, right? Some people were bringing this up, like, why are these full mature trees in the middle of the fairgrounds? Well, they didn't tear up every single one of them. They saved many of them and replanted them in other locations. Here they are dragging another tree with a steam tractor, right? So we've got steam shovels or an excavator. We got steam tractors, right? We're doing pretty good. Now, here we go. Here's just sort of an idea of how much grading they had to do. In one of the reports that I found, it was nearly 14 million cubic feet of dirt that they had moved around just for the grading of all of these projects. That's a lot, an enormous amount. Now here's another snapshot of them pulling a grading sled with a tractor. And you can see this is at a later time because there's partially built buildings in the background. Now here is a great picture of one of these steam tractors pulling one of these grading sleds. And I mean, this thing is super cool, right? You've got heavy weights in the front. You've got this guy up here who's almost looks like he's driving a land yacht, something like that. But you can see you got the curved wheels and the different plowing heads. So this thing is pretty impressive, really. I didn't know that they had all this stuff, but they did. They really had a lot of different types of technologies in this time frame to do this kind of work. Now, here's something very interesting, is that, what are they going to do with all of these different tree stumps? Well, you got to blow them up with dynamite. They weren't all blown up with dynamite, but there certainly was a fair amount of them being blown up with dynamite. Here's an example of it, and this looks probably like the best job in the entire construction effort. Kind of reminds me a little bit of having some fun with tannerite, if you know what I mean.
Oh no.
Now, I kind of want to take another little view of another channel, Jared Booster. He kind of gives another little angle of talking about some of these, I don't know, just like who the main players are and what they're doing.
This history. It's written that this George Kessler, who is actually given credit in the narrative, worked as a gardener for Frederick Law Olmsted for a large portion of his life, and Just by chance, Frederick Law Olmsted is actually credited with designing many buildings and repurposing many buildings in the St. Louis area, including the Botanical Gardens. So it's really interesting that Frederick Law Olmsted was working in the vicinity of the World's Fair. However, he is not given the credit, and it's actually considered to be an ancient or old world myth that Frederick Law Olmsted designed this World's Fair. Now, what makes it even more of a myth or an urban legend is that the fair was originally scheduled to open in 1903, which would mark 100 years since the Louisiana Purchase. However, for quote unknown reasons, the fair was pushed back by 1 year and it opened in 1904. Now, what makes that interesting is that Frederick Law Olmsted actually passed away in 1903. So, at the same time that he passed away, the entire fair was pushed back. Now, they're saying Frederick Law Olmsted had nothing to do with the fair. However, his former gardener, George Kessler, is actually considered to be the master architect behind the whole thing. Is that at all suspect to you? Does it make sense that every building, road, statue, lantern, all of these things popped up in this short 36-month period? Or would it make more sense that Frederick Law Olmsted, a seasoned architect, would actually have been working in this area possibly before the time period that we are given?
And I struggle a little bit because I'm noticing a little bit of a trend that we kind of just keep reading Wikipedia pages. I'm not saying that's the only amount of research that everybody did, but there's certainly more information than what's on a Wikipedia page. Okay, so we're going to just, I don't know, for a second, we're going to move and go, I don't know, beyond Wikipedia. Okay, let's go beyond Wikipedia for a second here. All right, well, let's go to this particular chart. So, all right, I maybe got a little too deep in this, right? All of these different reports, if you go to the Missouri History, online Missouri History collection, you'll find all these documents. I'll try to put as many as I can in the link section, and that in the St. Louis Public Library. So each one of these main departments had to provide a report when they were done about what they did. That's where most of this information is coming from, and I tried to link it together with the construction photos that they took. They took nearly 3,500 photos. I found a whole lot of them. This is what I've been able to produce. Up top, you have Mr. David Francis. He is the president of the Louisiana Purchase Company. There are several departments. I'm not going to get into all of them. We're mainly going to be focusing here on the Department of Works. So Mr. Isaac Taylor's the man. This guy was the director, right? The director of works, and he probably coordinated a huge amount of this effort. Now, underneath him, you have the architectural department and Emmanuel Masqueret. These two men are like some of the most critical players of getting this fair done. You know, these guys really, you know, Masqueret in particular, like he really helped design a lot of the buildings, and all of his draftsmen helped do the drawings, and Mr. Turtle here, he helped do the construction efforts, and Markman, he did engineering, and Mr. Mayberry did specification writing. And then we have an entire department of sculpture doing a lot of that mysterious work with staff. I know, it's kind of there's a little bit of a debate about it, but you know, what am I going to do? Anyways, you got an entire department of civil engineering, and we'll spend a little bit of time here looking at some of Charles E. Young's work. Good job, Charles. And we're, you know, a little bit of Department of Mechanical and Electrical Engineering. There's an entire landscape department and a Commission of Architects department. Now, the architects were assigned to do the actual designs of the buildings, okay? And here's our good buddy, George Kessler. Now, he was an advisor to the Commission of Architects, but what he did was kind of help form the large scale plan, right? That he's a landscape architect. So yes, he helped sort of come up with the, you know, put a building here, put a building there, put some water features here and there. But beyond that, he didn't design any buildings. He didn't design any drainage. He didn't lay down pumps or electrical systems or anything like that. He just did the landscaping. And while he did a great job, the man, I'm not putting him down, but to say he's 100% anything is ridiculous. Nobody's 100% anything, right? This takes an enormous company to do this kind of work, which is exactly what you would expect if you really understand anything about doing construction work, which I don't think a lot of people really honestly can say that they have a lot of direct knowledge with. Anyways, so after they get done grading this land, there was something very interesting. They actually had a pretty big problem. They had a river running right through the middle of the park, the River de Pere. If you're from the area, you might have heard the River de Pere. I did. I didn't know anything about it, but here it is. It ran right through the middle of Forest Park. Here it is right here. And yeah, it couldn't be there. So they had to do something about it. Good buddy Charles E. Young did something about it. So what he did is he altered the length of it, basically chopped it in half is what he ended up doing. And what this did is basically change the velocity of it. And he had to come up with some particular engineering features of having a perfectly flat bottom in its entire length. Interesting. Now, here they are using some horses to sort of dig out this channel. And up here you'll notice, right, it said 48 feet in width and almost 15 feet deep throughout. Right, it's pretty big. So here's a good picture of it. You can see how deep it is and sort of like, you know, how wide it is. And yes, they're using a combination of horses and other various things. Now, here's where things get a little interesting, because you might ask yourself, why in the world would they start building a wooden floor in the bottom of a ditch? That's where the perfectly flat bottom part comes in. And that's what they had to do. So they literally are going to build an entire wooden conduit. You think of it like a giant storm sewer is what this is. So here it is. He's talking a little bit more about, you know, that it was being one of the principal streets and had to basically be level, right? Because, well, basically people are going to walk over top of it. Here's a view of it. Had these 3 compartments to basically just help the water flow better. Now here's a really good snapshot of just to try to understand the scale of how much effort they put into this. You know, people are very quick to say, look at these buildings. Look at how much work they did on these buildings. Look at how much work they did grading all this land and basically digging out an entire river and all the other underground work that we'll see here in a minute. Like, there is a lot more going on than just building temporary buildings. Here they are building the top of, you know, the covering piece where the people were going to walk. So this was almost like a boardwalk, really. Now, here you'll start to see a little bit of some of the roads. Yes, they put a lot of roads in, and we'll get into that a little bit deeper here in a minute. Okay. Now, I know that at one point in time, John talks a little bit about, like, where did all this concrete come from? Okay. So we'll get into this here right now. So part of these reports, this was one of the things I found. They had to build these Telford construction roads. I don't know anything about Telford construction roads. I found this neat little image here to give you an idea. I think what it is it basically just has a better foundation and a combination of these larger rocks and smaller rocks, and it basically just helps do some better drainage than this other type of road that they had to do. Now, this is one of the first contracts, and there are lots of contracts. I mean, a lot of them, several hundreds and hundreds of them that I could find. Now, one thing that you'll notice, that you might not notice it if you don't have any exposure to construction type work, but there's a particular phrase right here. It says, liquidated damages at the rate of $20 per day for time required beyond the time fixed for completion. Liquidated damages
damages are damages predetermined when parties initially form a contract. At the time of forming the contract, liquidated damages are determined and the compensation amount is calculated that the injured party will receive in the event the contract is breached. Liquidated damages are not to punish the breaching party, but rather to put a price on costs that are difficult to determine ahead of time. Parties also have a liquidated damages clause in their contract. This allows the parties to determine the amount the damages will be, rather than having the court determine that amount.
They're bad. They're bad and they're good, just like the lady said. Okay, so what's going on, right? We're trying to build these Telfer roads because they're superior, but the problem is they're too expensive and they take too much time. And so what we ended up having to do is they actually had to start building these maximum roadways. And you just, to give you a little bit of insight, right? They're doing grading, they're running sewage systems, they're installing water pumps and water pipes, sanitary systems, fire protection, they're building roads, and they're starting to do the grading for the individual buildings and starting to do starting to build some of the actual buildings at this point in time. There's just a lot of things going on. And here's an example of a maximum road. And it's basically just a road that's just, it doesn't have as much of that foundation work in it. It's a little bit easier to build and maintain. Now, just during the construction period, at times there was almost 950 men separated in 310 teams. And, basically they ended up, they started to build their own roads is really what ended up happening. And they ended up purchasing 6 steamrollers for construction and maintenance of the roadways. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that they decided to use this burnt gumbo as a topping or finishing for all the roadways and packways. The color of the material is very pleasing and fits with the landscape. Now, I tried looking up gumbo, and it's the only thing that I could find is this reference right here to this bentonite clay. Gumbo's more technical name is bentonite clay, and it basically does look like it's like a lighter type of material used for asphalt, and I believe that is giving it this sort of concrete appearance, but it's really just asphalt.
Massiveness of this fair. Surely we would expect to see one picture of mixing concrete. Where is all this concrete coming from? It would take years, again, in just this picture, to pour all the concrete, dig out these lakes and waterways, and plumb all the fountains in, and power them. Super high tech.
So here is the steamroller, which is awesome. So, we're already getting into a lot of different technologies at this point in time. They had 6 of these things. Now, they also started making this asphalt at site. Here's the asphalt machinery set up. And then here they are starting to actually, throw this bentonite clay through a kiln process to produce the asphalt so that they could pave all these roads. And over here, you'll notice that hospital. Brookings Hall. All right, we're moving along. Something to keep in mind. Few streets in any large city are subjugated to any heavier traffic than some of the main thoroughways in the expedition grounds during the height of the construction period. 19 million people. Remember that number, 19 million. So much so that they had to actually have an entire team. There was like a 30-man team working in like 10 shifts just to keep the roads clean. And they employed the use of these sort of street sweepers, and they've had the street sweepers since nearly the 1840s, basically. Here's so now we're going to look into some of the underground work, right? We got we got some main grading, we've dealt with a river. Now we're going to look at some of the underground work, trenching, piping, things like that. Here is a contract to Barrett Construction Company for something called an electrical subway. And once again, liquidated damages, $100 a day. Here's this thing that they're going to be building. Doesn't look like much right now, but here's what it actually looks like after it's built. It's basically a pipe rack, is what it is. And here is what it looks like once they've loaded it up with all these pipes. And then they sort of packed it in with a sort of clay-like material. It's pretty awesome. And just to give you some context, like, here is a contract for 3.2 million feet of wire and 430,000 feet of wire. This somehow I happened to stumble across a meeting minutes note from the executive committee. They basically had to give this purchase order to be duly signed and executed by the president, probably because the dollar figure of it was so high. Moving along. Here you go. This is a really nice sort of example of just, some very large drainage pipes, but there's just, it's just an entire forest of tree stumps. And then notice this temporary railroad over here. It's just, it's really wavy and wonky, honestly. But, this was temporary, and they were moving tracks around to get material all over the place. It just shows you how much effort that they put into just getting to this point so far. So here we are in May 23rd of 1902. And you can see here's some water pipes that they're running underground and protecting some of the trees. Here's another contract to give you a sense of just like how many thousands of feet of pipes that was purchased and installed. This also had another unique liquidated damage contract of $50 delay on like a start delay and $100 for every day you don't finish in time. So it's you better start on time and you better finish on time. This is a little bit later in the timeline, but you can just see like here's how they can run these pipes under the ground. Here's them digging out a well for one of the water pump systems. And this is just to give you a sense of how many toiletries and other sanitation devices that they had installed. So, this is almost very modern, right? It's not like, once again, it's not as if this is just some rural pumpkin bumpkin sort of thing. Now, let's start talking about the actual architecture department, right? Because you need a department. You need multiple departments to do this kind of work. So here we go. We got a report from Mr. Weatherwax here. He's the chief draftsman. And you can see they had 67 draftsmen working at any given throughout the whole period here. I just love some of these little notes that they put in some of the reports. It would take one man 67 years, 3 months, 2 days, 6, 11 and 16ths hours. 11 and 16. What a drafter thing to do. Here's just to give you a sense of, the buildings are temporary, right? They're temporary, but they still had to be built for strength and durability. And just to kind of give you a little sense of, all right, so this is something that I wanted to look into, is to just give you a sense of, they understood that these were temporary, right? The buildings had to be strong under snow loads and wind loads. Staff and plaster could only be put on long enough to represent the architectural forms. They were compelled to use construction that's far greater than what was required. And they had to provide for the maximum strains possible, right? They knew going in that the bulk of the material was going to go to waste. It's sad, but they knew that that's what it would require. Now, this is a nice little quote from Philip Markman. He says, "The necessary strength of the buildings can, therefore, be influenced only to a slight degree by the argument that they have to stand for a brief period only." I think it's fair, right? It's a fair thing to say. So here's just some, part of the report. I'm not going to read through all of it. Here's some more part of it. They're talking about how they had to deal with some of the various unique aspects of building foundations. Here was, within this report, they talk about these, the foundations being spread on cribbed footings. So this is what a wooden cribbed footing is. And then here is the real life version of it. This was for one of the big buildings that we're going to be looking at here in a minute. Now, one of the other things they talk about is besides cribbing, they had basically like, piles, right, to put the foundations on. So, of course, you need a pile driver, and that's what this is, a pile driver, a steam pile driver. Here's just some more details talking about, this is sort of the first instance where we really mention wood, okay? They really get into some details about the wood. And so they don't just use any wood, they use longleaf yellow pine in particular, as well as another piece of wood that we'll see in a minute. Now, I'm not a civil engineer. I don't really understand how all of these particular formulas work because I don't need to, but they clearly did, and that's really the important part I want to stress. Along with the longleaf yellow pine, they also used white oak in a very particular way, which I find interesting. And then they just go on to talk about all the various details about how they went about designing these things. They talk about trusses and knee bracing and the various aspects of dealing with compression stresses and strengths, tensile strengths. Once again, a bunch of things that I really don't know much about. But if you're so inclined, there's some great information from things like the Efficient Engineer and some other things. Moving on. So, to make all the tension splices of jointed timber used in the long bottom cords of trusses, generally built of two parallel breaking joints. Each stick net cross will carry 75% of the cord tension so that every joint can transmit 50% of its stress to the other stick running by, and the other 50% to a special splice pad on the outside of the cord. Oak keys placed with bolts. So, what in the world does any of that mean? Well, it means something like this. So basically they were taking taking multiple timbers and splicing them together to make a really long span board. It's what they were doing to be used on the trusses. And so what they would do is they would basically they'd take this drill pattern, map it out, and drill out these holes using a compressed air auger drill. So once again, yet another piece of very useful technology. Now, sandwiched in between these pieces of wood is another piece of wood. And see here, he's drilling the hole for the white oak key. Okay. Here's sort of before drilling it. Now, this white oak key was a 2-inch diameter rod that was basically placed into these bored holes. Now, originally they wanted to use square, but it just completely was not cost effective, so they couldn't do it. And basically what they do is once they put this white oak key into the auger bit hole, that's when they tighten everything down really hard. And somehow, some way, they knew that basically by using the different characteristics of the white oak key rods, that, and you combine that with the yellow pine and the way that the tensile strength of it works, they basically were able to create a really unique joint that I think is just it's an incredible piece of engineering, really. I don't know how frequently they did things like this, but it's really impressive. Here's just a little history of trusses, if you don't understand what a truss is. There's a lot of references to the Howell truss in particular. And once you see a truss, you start seeing them everywhere, and you'll see them all throughout these construction photos. Here is a Howell truss right here. And what it is you got, bottom cord, top cord, you've got the different bracing, but this right here, you've got this metal rod that goes in between it. And this is sort of one of the unique characteristics of a Howell truss. Okay, now we're going to talk about another thing that John mentioned in one of his videos.
And a purchase monument and palace of varied industries. What does varied industries mean? But random. The palace of random industry. And here we do see quite the crowd. In fact, the largest crowd we've seen yet. Looking absolutely boring. Actually seeming like they're waiting for something.
And this is going to be the Palace of Varied Industries. Now, this is the first building we're going to look at. We're going to look at two, and then hopefully you'll have more than enough information to make whatever judgment you're going to make by the end of this. Here we go is what we're looking at, the Varied Industries building. It was designed by the architectural firm Van Brunt and Howell. You can see how much they got paid. Here is the contract from Roundtree Construction Company. They're the ones who built it. And like always, contractors shall pay liquidated damages $500 a day. Oof, that's pretty harsh to be finishing in October 1st of 1902. Remember that date. Okay, here we go. Just trying to make it as real as possible. Yet another interesting little, this is an interesting snippet from one of the execution, the meeting minutes from the executive committee. This was a letter presented to the president. Basically, it's a complaint letter from the Northwestern lumbermen saying that the St. Louis Exposition is discriminating against them. Basically, what they wanted to do is they wanted us to change from longleaf yellow pine to change it to Douglas fir, because that's what kind of wood they had up there. However, you looked at the engineering designs and all the calculations were based off of longleaf yellow pine. They couldn't do it and he had to decline it. But it's just interesting, right? Here we go. One of the first construction photos right here. So these are wall supports and they are using a Warren truss type of design in these columns. Now up here, I started to notice a lot of use of snatch block pulleys. Now, if you don't know what that is, you need to go check out this video from Smarter Every Day to learn about snatch blocks, right? I think the more things you understand about how these things are possible, I think you'll look at this and hopefully really start to understand how they were able to do this. Here we go. It's starting to come up a little bit more. And one thing to keep in mind is that the construction company that built the building was also responsible for grading their own properties. It was part of the contract deal. So, and you can see this is from May 3rd of 1902. Here they are dangling without fear on crazy ladders. Another reason why they were able to get this done as quickly as they did. So here we are starting to really come up. And they're framing and they're really good at it and they're building it really quickly out of wood. Here is an enormous wood stockpile. You can see just how massive. This is for one building, just one. Here is another example view of it. Huge. It's just massive, like massive. Here's another view of a different section. Now, here's another thing, right? They built these railroads, these temporary railroads up to all these buildings to distribute all this material up to them. And you notice this is called a hospital, because that's the one more thing. Unfortunately, if you don't think that this happened, tell that to the 11 people that died during construction. Right? Here we go. Starting to really come up. We got a floor, we got walls. Starting to take shape. May 17th, right? They are doing some serious work here. By May 23rd, we are building up, and this is where you'll notice your first batch of staff, right? This is the material that they fastened as a facade on the outside and inside of a lot of these buildings. This is what everybody thinks is made of stone. It's not. It's staff, and we'll look at this here in just a minute. Here's another picture of the staff panels, and they build these things up on these wooden frames, for one, that they could be handled and moved around, but also so that they could be fastened to the wooden frames of the buildings themselves. So this guy is Carl Bitter. He is the chief of sculpture, running the Department of Sculpture. Now, this guy actually has a direct connection to the other world fairs. He worked at the Columbian Exposition and the Pan American Exposition. Now, he kind of got his lead on this Dewey Arch, which was made of staff, made of wood, and temporarily built for a parade. And this is sort of where he built, he kind of got this idea of how to do this. Now, here is a staff and plaster contracting company. So, like, here are the guys that are building all this stuff. Here are more contractors from a different group also building this staff material. This is very telling right here. This is a column, a mold for one of the column pieces. You see the long indentations, and see how it's curved like this? This is how they gave that appearance of the columns. And so all the staff is like this. You have to have these molds, either built of clay or wood, to be able to do this staff work. This is just an example of another shop, because they build a lot of stuff in shops, sometimes local, sometimes not. But here is a giant pile of hemp on the ground, right? Because it's a combination. Well, here you go. Here is a recipe. Okay, I'm not going to read it all to you, but basically it's just it's a form of plaster that is combined with hemp fibers, is what it is. Now, this is a picture of a studio in Weehawken, New Jersey. You can see it's just completely loaded up with just amazing, beautiful sculptures. Now, here's just trying to make things real for everybody. This is a report from Carl Bitter. He's like, in Weehawken, right, doing great, but had numerous difficulties with the team engaged in the shop in St. Louis. Why? Because of the plasterers union, right? The union was involved. There was some disagreement about pointing, that's a plaster term, and this type of sculpture work. They wanted to make it the same thing, but it's not. So Carl ended up winning in the end. Anyways, here you go. This is how the artisans went about making some of these things. Here's another example of a real nice decorative piece. Now here is a really cool sculpture piece, right? And you can see here's the smaller sculpture, and then here's the enlarged version of it. So this piece is built off-site by an artist somewhere else, then brought here, and then this guy will take it and make the larger form out of it. Here's another real nice piece of decorative piece outside. And here is, I just love this. So what we're going to see below is this thing referred to as, it's a form of a pantograph. Look it up if you don't know what it is. But here is basically what's going on. So you got this guy down here, and what he's doing is he's looking at this small little statue here, and he's pointing this little needle piece to it, which is connected up here to this rod, to this enlarger. Okay, that's what a pantograph does. It enlarges something. And so this void right here is where this guy is going to use the staff material to plaster up to that point and build out this form right here. Very, very cool. Okay, moving along. Just a lot more staff. There's a lot of staff used. An enormous amount, actually. Here's just another field of it right here, all drying out. Here's some guys moving it with a cart. Here's sort of what it, we'll sneak behind the scenes, right? They're just sliding it into place. Here it is, unfinished. Here's what it looks like afterwards. Now this just gives you a sense of how much of it. This is another contractor, and this, it's scattered all throughout here. All of that is staff being dried. It's a massive, massive amount. Here it is inside, and look at all those trusses, man. They look pretty, don't they? Look at all the staff being dried inside. Here's a really great little before and after shot. So here is what it looks like before, right here. And this is what it looks like after. Cool, huh? It's awesome. So here is the Indiana building, what it looks like before, in the middle, and this is, and then right here, part of the stock. More panel close-ups, and this is sort of what it looks like when it's all done. Indistinguishable from stone. It's awesome, right? So here we are back to our varied industry building. It's really coming along now. And these guys here are actually building that river to pair, covering it up. Just to give you a sense of how big this thing is. Absolutely massive. Here those guys are laying that foundation we've seen before. There's another one of those pile drivers right there. It's really starting to take shape. Now here's the first section. You'll see this thing. You've seen it before, but this is called a moving crane, right? A moving crane. They used them all over the place. Here's a little different view of it, and you can see they build these sort of tracks and move it around. See this down here though? That's a steam hoist. Okay, yet another piece of technology, a steam hoist. There's that Howell truss right down there. See it? There's a frame. Look at the size of these timbers. Like they're just really big. Here we go. We have made it into June, and the building's really starting to take shape. It's the backside of one of the arch sections. There's pipe they're starting to lay on the ground, and you got to remember, it's like they're doing all this stuff simultaneously, right? Here we are in July, and it's really starting to come up now. And look at how many staff pieces they're getting ready to put on at this point. Now, pay attention here, because now the staff has just been put in place, right? And they're just really getting ready to just put a whole bunch of it in there. Here's just a picture of the domes being wrapped over with wood. Here we are in August 5th, and guess what? A storm comes through. You're from the area, we get tornadoes, we get really strong storms, we get snowstorms, we get really hot summers. Weather's all over the place around here. If you don't like it, just wait about 5 minutes, it might change. More images of the damage here. Different snapshot of the dome. just a sense of how big the building is and just sort of what it's how it's made. Here's a really big truss that they're getting ready to pull up. You can see there's a ton of guys out here working. Some of these guys back here, they're moving some wood with this cool little like wheelbarrow looking thing. Here's another sort of example of, you know, how did they move all this wood and stuff? Well, they had all kinds of ways of moving this stuff. Yeah, they had the snatch blocks. They had all kinds of little dollies and things like this. Here's just an example. They're getting ready to, you know, bring the roof up. Just look at these guys, man. Just no safety harnesses at all. They're just getting stuff done. Staff missing in the middle. Here it is from a distance. Here is one of the roof sections. Once again, there's that center metal post with the howell truss and the roof. Just from a distance. Oh yeah, they're starting to build a road right here. Remember, they're building roads all over the place, right? And look, they even, not only did they have steamrollers, but they had these horse-drawn rollers as well. Here the building's starting to really take form. Here it is, really taking form at this point. So here we are in January 1st of 1903. And remember the thing about liquidated damages, $500 a day if they didn't get it done by October. Okay, they could be $45,000 in the hole at this point, which is pretty scary. And it kind of makes me think of like, is this really probably why they weren't able to get it done in 1903 like they wanted to? I think so. They're in total scramble mode at this point. Like they're just completely scrambling, trying to get this thing done. Here's just a picture of the roof. Now this is cool because it shows you a building that's missing. Here's the building we've been looking at. Here's the electrical building, and then here's the transportation building. Notice the railroad. Here's the railroad right here. This is the building we've been looking at, and then there's the missing transportation building. Where did it go? I don't know. It's not there. Here we are in April 30th of 1903. And they're doing a little dedication. They're building some bleachers for one of the earlier dedications. It's really, really getting close at this point. Now, here is a electrical schematic, right? Just putting a little more flavor into this to really set it in place of how real this actually is. So here we are, July of 1903. And then here's the Torchbearers by Bruno Zim on top of the building. And remember, this looked like total chaos here a minute ago. Here is the building, and you notice the lagoons and stuff haven't really been completely formed by at this point. Here we are in August of 1903. Really almost done at this point. And you know, lagoons are starting to come together. Now by August of 1903, this is the inside of the building. Now, one of the things that I noticed is that the contracts were separated. The outside and main structure was by one group of contractor. The inside was another one. And another thing to remember is that the company was only dealing with the core buildings themselves. The other states had to deal with they had to build their own buildings. The foreign countries had to build their own buildings. The concessions had to build their own buildings. In fact, they had to pay the company to use their electricity, to use their water, and to use their sewage. And they bought ice from them at the refrigeration plant. Now, I know that in one of the videos he talks about, you know, there's 1,200 buildings that were made. This is true technically, but honestly, like 50 of them alone are ticket booths. Okay, so all kinds of little tiny buildings like that were also made. That you know, that's to say that they're all on the grand scale like this is just not correct. So here we are in when we, yep, we are in November. Getting really close, but you can still see there's still some plaster work that has to be done. Almost pretty much done at this point. And then here you go. This is the Palace of Varied Industries right here. Pretty darn cool. All right. And then here it is on opening day. Wow. It's a big crowd. Really, really big crowd. All right. Let's move on to the final building. This is Festival Hall. Here's a little snippet of John's video about that.
And right from the get-go, one of my favorite buildings here in the hall exhibit, the Festival Hall in Cascades. Very festive indeed. And there's many pictures of this. I don't know why they used this rendering. Probably because it's so unbelievable. This one site and building would not be possible by these people in this time frame on this budget. It's one building.
Okay. So Festival Hall is designed by Cass Gilbert. He's the architect. Here are some basic drawings of one of the cascading water sections. Here are them clearing the ground. And unfortunately, I don't have as many photos of this one as the Varied Industries. Here is a side section view of that drawing from above. Here it's taking shape, and remember, it's a big crescent. That's what it is. So that's one of the restaurants. We're basically standing at the other side of it. Here's just another view of it. This is what one of the restaurants looks like. Pretty close to being done. There's still staff panels down here. Here's what the other one is looking like. Here's some crazy guys that are just standing up here doing this work. Here's an electrical schematic for the buildings. And this is what it looked like. This is the restaurant. This is what one of the restaurants on the two ends looked like. Very impressive. Now this is the main building here. This is the back section of it. Here's another angle of it. Here is the front waterway section being built up. And these particular pedestals are empty right now, but not for long. Here's some statues. And let's see here. We are in September of 1903. So remember, these things are running in parallel. Here it is, that same view, looking at those pedestals. Here we are, and not much longer. Different view, kind of looking up this time. Starting to, really take shape. We are in October, almost the end of October. That back section building starting to take, come up. Now this is the inside of that building. Inside of it. Nice trusses. Got some kind of a steam powered tool of some kind here. We are in December 24th of 1903, and they're really starting to really build this thing up at this point. And this is a really awesome building. We spent a lot of time designing this one. And this is sort of what it looks like, the interior scaffolding. Wow. And so that's another thing, is that these guys weren't afraid to build scaffolding, right? They took full advantage of building scaffolding to do the work up high, right? They didn't wait around for scissor lifts and all these they just built wood scaffolding everywhere. Now, this is an entire section about them describing the dome, the main dome for Festival Hill. They were very proud of it, and they gave some very interesting details about how it was made. 4 principal Howell trusses span over the square. It's 45 degrees, another prism of 4 Howell trusses. And it was done 5 levels high. It's just interesting. Now, I tried to detail as much of the dome part as I possibly could, so that's what these next photos are. This is sort of what it looks like when it's getting done. This is what it looked like at the very end. Okay, we're at December of 1903. This is back at the original timeline. So here we are looking front and forward. 2 restaurants on the end are pretty much done, but this part's still getting made. That's sort of what it looks like. Now it's really starting to come up. You got a ton of scaffolding being put up. Now here is January of 1904. So again, if you're from the area, you know how cold it is in this time. And here we are. We got snow on the ground. But look at this building right here. Notice what happens. We're in February. Okay, a month later. Boom. Okay, they didn't stop building at all. It just kept going. This is some sort of electrical cable puller that they were using. Here we are in March, and you can see it's nearly complete at this point. April 1904, notice this. So those statues from above have been put in place. And then here we go. We've got water in the basin, building's basically done. And here are one of the test runs of the lights. Pretty cool, pretty cool. And then this is what the fairgoers would have actually seen. So, and just in case, got to give Mr. Kessler some credit here. He did plant nearly 2.6 million plants when it was all said and done with. Even if, you know, most of it was vines. Now, the sad part. So we're going to be standing around here looking forward to see the Alps. And they had to, it's just hard to look at, but they just completely wiped it down. And those Alps are right back there in the background here. So, come to find out, there were a lot of houses that used some of this leftover material. So there's a lot of houses that were built from this wood. They saved what they could, but, you know, unfortunately they knew going in that they were going to waste a bunch of material. So I'm not getting into all the reasons for why they did it. I just wanted to show you the construction. But let's just finish this up with a quick little clip from John, and I hope to see you later.
Were said to be. And I'm not sure about the true Native American history 100 years ago, as I'm not sure of our history referring to all people 100 years ago. None of this makes any sense. And perhaps the most disturbing is, why would they lie to us? And personally, I think if we knew our past, we wouldn't live the way we do in the present, and we wouldn't tolerate or consent to all subsequential deception. And when we accept one lie, we silently give permission for another.